Hello and welcome back to Bunny Hoof Studio. If you've been here before, you'll know that I've been working on an art doll for a while now. The last time I was sculpting and painting her face. This time I'm making her tiny hands and feet, and let me tell you, this was such a fiddly and time-consuming process, but thankfully, due to the magic of editing, you'll be seeing all the best bits. So today I'm using air drying clay and experimenting with wire to reinforce the fingers. I have actually tried sculpting hands before, and this was before I even started recording anything for this channel, and although they weren't too bad, I wanted to see if I could find a way of making more detailed fingers and toes despite the size being so tiny. It's funny how sculpting and drawing have some surprising crossovers. The way I have created the base of the hand isn't dissimilar to how I would begin drawing a hand. Despite not having much sculpting experience, being able to draw has definitely helped me with my sculpting. When I draw a hand, I will often sketch out the basic shape of the palm before adding the fingers, and this is pretty much exactly what I'm doing with this clay hand. I add PVA glue to help reinforce the joints and make sure the shape of the palm, wrist and arm are correct. I reference both the hands together to make sure my second one is as similar as possible in size, although by the end they do actually look quite different, but they are proportionally similar. I add grooves in with my silicone tool as well. I'm still getting used to knowing when to add detail. Sometimes it's easier to add detail while the clay is still wet, and other times it's much easier to carve into the clay once it's dry. I think it probably also changes depending on what scale you're working at too. And while working this small, carving always poses the risk of too much clay breaking off by accident. These hands and feet I'm working on will be attached to the sewn soft body of the doll, and you'll see her completely come together at the end. I actually came up with this idea for my doll by watching an amazing doll restorer here on YouTube called Irene's Restoration. I saw how she reattached the limbs of an antique doll onto a soft body, and I decided I also wanted to try it this way. I think this is how many ceramic dolls were made. And now to attach the clay fingers to the wire, somehow. This was incredibly fiddly and often took several attempts. I resigned myself to the sculpt looking very stubby until I would be able to shape the clay better once dry. I knew that I would need to wait for parts to dry before adding more details or more clay on top or shaping the fingers a bit better. The style of the dolls I'm attempting to make at the moment are sort of ball-jointed doll adjacent in aesthetic, but I wanted to try making them with the kind of ceramic doll look. I really like the idea of them having a soft body and clay attached limbs. It's sort of this in-between sort of doll. I'm hoping that it gives it kind of a unique edge, but we'll see once the doll all comes together. The second hand went a little smoother as I'd gotten the feel for how wet or dry the clay needed to be to slide onto the wire without distorting it too much. If I added too much pressure to the clay, it would become completely misshapen or slide around on the wire. This was honestly a very fiddly process. I know that there are other higher quality types of air drying clay out there, and I wonder if they're much easier to use for this sort of small detail. If you happen to have used a type of air drying clay that worked really well for you, I'd love it if you could tell me about that in the comments. I begin to shape the palm by carving out the center, and I use my scalpel to shape the fingers a little better before leaving them to dry, often removing the tiniest pieces to improve the shape of the fingers. These are absolutely minuscule little adjustments that barely show up on camera. If you're doing this yourself, I recommend you look at reference just to see where the certain dips and shapes appear on the fingers. So far, I think they are looking okay. There's a long way to go, but at least they do resemble hands. So a few days have passed and the hands are nice and dry. I use my scalpel to scrape along the clay, taking off any bumps that I don't want and shaping the fingers a little better. I find working this small, the fingers can look more rectangular than round, and so the scalpel is a great way of gently carving off any edges and helping the fingers look a little more cylindrical. And the wonderful thing about air drying clay is that you can always add a little bit of water if you want to soften up the surface a bit, making it a bit easier to take away any clay. I also attach more little pieces of clay to areas where the wire is still a bit exposed, and while some of the fingertips are wet from the new clay, I gently carve in some fingernail dents. I also add more clay around the base of the fingers. As I've been carving and adding a little bit of pressure to the fingers, cracks keep forming around the base because the fingers keep moving ever so slightly, cracking the clay. This actually becomes a continuous problem, unfortunately, despite my efforts of adding more clay and more glue over the course of the video. So if you want to make hands this way too, I would suggest either using a much stiffer wire than the one that I used, so you don't want it to be as flexible, or having the wire only poke out just a tiny amount before you add the clay fingers on top. This will mean that it has much less flexibility, therefore avoiding cracking the clay completely if the fingers get bashed by something. Basically, the fingers are not rigid enough, and they keep slightly moving when any pressure is applied, which then makes the clay around the wire crack. I felt already pretty deep in with my hands, so I was hoping at this stage building up the layers of glue and clay would eventually stiffen out the fingers completely. I've been adding more tiny pieces of clay and carving away other parts to get more of the shape that I want from the hands down to the wrists. So this is a foot I made around a year ago for my prototype doll here. And it's not bad. I want to maybe try using a bit of wire for my next sculpted feet too. So I begin sculpting out the general shape of the feet, add wire and begin adding the toes, but I very quickly gave up on this method. The toes are just too small and close together to easily cover the wire with clay. It just becomes a mess of clay and it just really didn't look good. Instead, I've carved out the foot shape I want and just haven't sculpted in the toes, but have left them fused together to be carved out once dry. I didn't want to waste the other feet I had made, so decided to attach these new feet onto the legs of the others using glue and then wet clay around it. It was actually a nice way of constructing the whole leg. This way I didn't have to worry about the whole thing being soft and malleable. Instead I had a very firm grip on the leg while working on the shape of the foot. I cut into the feet to make sure they are the same size, and once the whole foot is dry, I add some more clay to build up the arches needed to help the feet look a bit better. While those are drying, I then get to sanding down the hands, another time-consuming process, but also quite fun as I can really shape the fingers nicely by taking away small, tiny, minuscule pieces of clay. The hands really start to look lovely once they become all smooth. I wet the fingers with water so I can attach more clay to parts that seem weak and cracking. I do this many times to both hands, as every time I sand them they seem to have tiny cracks that form around the base of the fingers due to the wire moving very slightly inside. Although this is frustrating, I'm actually really pleased with the hands. They are by far so much better than the ones I had attempted in the past. So even if practically speaking they're weaker, I'm still a step closer to figuring out how I want to sculpt mine for all my future dolls I want to make. And now the feet. This process was really long and quite intense. I think in hindsight I perhaps should have sculpted a little of the toe shape before leaving it to dry, as starting from nothing proved to be very time consuming. Rehydrating the clay helps a lot with the carving, and switching between tools to see which is the most effective helps too. I think the needle was one of the most useful for this kind of intricate sculpting. The scalpel was also perfect for taking off larger pieces of clay that were way too thick or not adding to the structure of the foot. in some shots of me working on these feet so you get a better sense of scale. I did feel like I was starting to destroy my eyes a bit, trying to focus so much on such small details. It's funny seeing myself in such a thick jumper, as right now I'm editing this in 33-degree heat. I actually really miss winter and spring. I really enjoyed winter and spring a lot this year with my Sylvanian cottage, and I completely redid my studio space during autumn. It just made winter a lot more enjoyable for me. I really put off making my studio space cozier, and it's amazing how these small changes can make such a huge difference and impact on your kind of emotional well-being and even your productivity. I found it's been so much easier to be productive with such a nice space to work in now. I'm actually not somebody that deals with hot weather very well. I find it quite overwhelming, and it tends to cause headaches and also just make me feel extremely lethargic and irritable. So I actually struggle quite a lot through summer. Here you can see on the right a beautifully smooth and sanded foot, and on the left unsanded. It's amazing how different they look. Sanding really is one of the most impactful things you can do when using air drying clay. And now for a real-time sleepy update from me. I'm so tired. Just been carving and sanding these feet for 3 hours straight, and that's just today. I cannot tell if that's in focus. I mean, I think I like how they turned out. I'm just so tired. Yeah, I think if I get really into the doll making stuff, I think I would like to look into casts, making molds. That way I can have like a set style of feet for a certain type of doll, and then I make a cast of the feet, so I don't have to be remodeling. I could also make, if I do want to sell these dolls, I could make a type of doll that's a lot simpler, that I wouldn't sell for as much, maybe. Like, there wouldn't be the same level of detail. But I don't know if I want to do that. I want my dolls to have tiny fingers and toes. I'm pretty pleased with the hands. This left hand still needs some reinforcement, just making sure they're strong enough so that the fingers don't crack and break. But yeah, I thought sculpting the face was the hardest, but it's not. Definitely, in terms of time, the feet are very time consuming, like very, very time consuming. But I'm not too far off being finished with them. Yeah, I'm just really tired. My eyes really hurt. And yeah, I feel a bit strange. I think I've just been focusing for too long without any breaks, and I'm hungry. I'm happy though, I'm happy with how it's turning out. I'm really close to having everything ready, so I'll just need to paint the face and the limbs, attach them to the body. I need to finish the body. It's still half finished. Well, it's half finished because it needs limbs. Then once that's done, I then need to make a wig for the first time ever. And then I would need to style the hair. Then the doll is finished except for clothes. So it's like I'm both like really close, but I still feel very far from finishing. But I feel really excited about it. I have so many ideas for dolls. I feel a little bit impatient with the sculpting process because I have so many nice ideas. That's why, that explains why people do casts. Once the body is all done and painted, I'm going to decide what outfit I'm going to be making for her. And here they both are now sanded. However, there are a few small imperfections that still need sorting. Once I'm done sanding, I brush water all over the sculpt to lock in all those fuzzy little pieces of dust that are left on the surface, and I use a fine needle to carve out other details while the surface is still damp. The legs have some dents in them and one of the ankles too, so I add some more clay to those areas, smooth and blend them in. And I also return yet again to my hands to add more reinforcements around the base of some of the fingers that still keep moving and cracking. I add a little water to the toes too, so I can easily carve out little toenails, and at this point the sculpting process is done. I'm pretty happy with how they've turned out so far, especially considering I hadn't tried this method before. And now to paint the limbs. So I have some past colour swatches here in my sketchbook to reference, and I'm going to use a mixture of watercolours and watercolour pencils. I used these for the face already, although I mostly used the pencils, and this time I'm going to experiment more with the watercolour for pigmenting the hands and feet. I was a bit too afraid to do that for my sculpted face, but I think next time I do a sculpted face, after doing this, I now feel more confident. I like just kind of bathing the feet in a wash as the pigment collects more in between the toes, and I think this effect looks really lovely, like it looks quite naturalistic. I was actually surprised at how quickly I nailed the skin tone, although I did discuss in my last video that I'm not sure the best way to achieve darker skin tones, because I would like to try that. And if watercolour would really give a good finish for those, I do need to do some research. I do want to look into getting pigment or some kind of pastels that I can use as pigment for darker skin tones, so I can apply it more like makeup, so it looks kind of more airbrushed. Because I have a feeling darker skin tones are gonna collect with watercolour in any tiny cracks and might make the skin look not so great. Or I might have to really sand a lot more, perhaps. Either that, or maybe I can add skin tone to the clay, maybe? I need to look into it. I use my super fine brush and more pigment to colour the toes a deeper blush to create a gradient to the main part of the foot. I then paint the nails on both the hands and the feet an even deeper shade. I think this really brings them to life. I built up the details and dimensions by using watercolour pencils and blending the pigment with a very slightly damp brush. I add highlights to the nails using white gesso too. I find it's these tiny details that really add a finished feel to the doll parts. I think I was starting to feel a bit more confident with my work because I decided to try something a little more risky. I wanted to add some very subtle vein details using a greenish blue paint and my ultra fine paintbrush. I found with this, a little goes a really long way. It's very easy to overdo it, so I used the pigment very watered down, and I was really surprised with how much this brought the sculpts to life. It was such a small detail, but it really added something kind of slightly uncanny to the feel of the skin. And now for varnishing. For most of the limbs, I'm using a matte varnish to lock in the pigment, and then for the nails, I'm carefully adding gloss varnish. I also used gloss varnish for her eyes and lips, which you'll see later, so I think this will help her to feel more aesthetically complete. So I hadn't actually sewn the arms yet, and I completely forgot that I needed to do this. I compare my prototype doll to the parts I'm about to sew just to make sure they're the correct size, as it had been so long since I'd done the arms. My sewing has really improved a lot since I've been doing it more, which I guess makes sense. I'm a lot neater and quicker, so I managed to get these finished quite quickly. Turning them the right way around is a bit of a challenge though, as they are so tiny. All of my parts are ready to be put together. It feels a little surreal to be at this stage. I'm not sure why, but I really got into my head about this doll. I think because there's so many different elements to learn and experiment with, it felt weirdly difficult to get to this stage. Even though I was so close for so long, I think the amount of stages needed to get to this point kind of overwhelmed me a bit. So I felt much further away to completing the body than I actually was, if that makes sense. Now to finally cut the foil from the end of the head so I can slot the neck inside the body. I had originally made the body thinking the head would be soft fabric and the face would be like a mask that would attach to the soft head. So I need to pick apart the neck so I can slot the head into the body. I was worried this might be complicated for some reason, or not go very smoothly or turn out really messy, but it ended up going really well. I just loosened the stitches, cut the excess, and tucked the ends inside, creating a kind of collar that would surround the neck. I slot her inside the opening, and I found tweezers really helped to bring the fabric up and around the neck, and she fits perfectly. I had glue under the fabric to ensure it secured well. I found using this tool made it much easier to get into the small gaps, and this probably is one of my most used tools for sculpting and just gluing as well. I then sew up to the neck and wrap the thread around the neck, further securing it. This is the exact technique that I mentioned earlier in the video, and I'll be using this to attach all the hands and the feet. I had already sewn a bit into the hip area, but I decided to sew more as I wanted this to have even more bend to it. I actually think in the future a horizontal line would work better than having it angle upwards. The angle that I'm using here causes the legs to bend inwards rather than staying parallel when she's sat, but this is a very small kind of minor detail. I also sew where the knee joints will be to ensure the stuffing stays in the thighs and doesn't slip down, and this means the knee will always stay flexible. I use the same technique as the neck on the legs, using glue and then sewing and wrapping the thread around the top of the leg. This actually stays really secure even without glue, but I use glue just to make sure it won't slip over time and loosen. And look how lovely the leg bends at the knee. The weight of the clay feet really adds to this effect as well. I really wanted my dolls to have legs that would dangle off a bookshelf or any other surface that they might sit on. My other leg turned out less wide, so I tightened up the stitching on one side before attaching the stitching around the top of the leg. I've already glued the leg inside, as this made it much easier to sew the edge of the leg tighter while keeping the leg in place. There is something so satisfying about attaching these legs. It really brought the soft body to life so much. I love how they dangle from the knees and the little sound they make when the feet gently collide. I begin stuffing the arms. A little tricky when they're this small, but I managed by using my tweezers and the end of a paintbrush. I then added the elbow joints with a thread so they can bend just like the legs. I added a little more stuffing to the forearms before attaching the arm inside. I started with glue this time and then placed the wrist inside. The fit is quite tight, so I started using the tweezers trying to drag the fabric up further around the wrist. And then something terrible happened. My tweezers slipped off the fabric, bashed into the fingers, and the clay around the wire became completely cracked and broken. So I managed to gently bend the clay back into place around the wire, and I basically just doused the whole thing in glue and decided to continue finishing the doll anyway. I wasn't even sure if I was going to share this part, but I decided to, because if you also want to make these hands, please just use less flexible wire than I did. I will definitely redo these hands at some point, either without wire or with different wire, and reattach them to the arms. I just know I can't sell dolls in the future if I think the fingers are going to bend and break this easily. So I have almost finished assembling my doll, and it was kind of a relief, especially when I put the head onto the body, when she started to look very real and very, I don't know, I feel like she has quite a presence, even without hair and an outfit. And I'm just relieved, mostly, because I think one of the strangest things about working on this has been a lot of it being a surprise and not really knowing exactly how things are going to turn out. So a lot of it I kind of went in quite blindly, and I had a rough idea of how I wanted things to look, but it was more the feeling of the doll that was the most important for me. And it's taken a long time and lots of experiments to kind of figure out exactly how to kind of get that feeling I wanted. And so I'm really excited with how she looks. Yeah, it almost doesn't feel real when I know she doesn't have arms yet, but when I put the head on and the feet on, it felt very special to finally get to this stage. So I have the arms here, and they bend. They probably are slightly too long, but I think I'm okay with that. I'm going to attach them not too high up, very slightly lower down, and the other one obviously on the other side. And I'm going to use this long needle here and some strong thread to thread string. Oh, I did not think of that. I just realised that her neck is in the way. Genius. Okay, well, I could probably go in front of the neck. I think it's fine. There's going to be a string going through here, the thread, because the neck sits down to about here. So hopefully I can figure something out where it will go across. It's windy. Okay, well, this is going to be a bit of an experiment. Worst comes to worst, I just have to redo it. This needle is a bit thick, but hopefully, because this material is quite thick as well, so I find that when I pierce a hole, it really makes like a dent in the fabric. But yeah, I'm going to give this my best shot, and she's almost ready to be, I guess, accessorized. I need to design an outfit for her. This is the hair. It needs to be sewn into a wig, so I need to make a wig and what kind of clothes I wanted to have. But yeah, I can't believe she's almost ready. So rewatching myself talking, I found it kind of funny, like my denial of anything bad happening. I think at that stage I just hadn't decided if I was going to keep it in the video, so I just didn't talk about it, but I should have talked about it because it's not like I had to put that part in. Also, sorry if I seemed very low energy. I seem to remember I wasn't feeling great the week I was assembling the body together. I think I'd had like 3 days in a row of migraines, and I was still powering through doing my doll work and other work because apparently I'm just that stubborn. So I'm sewing the arms onto the body, the final step. Despite me realising the neck is in the way, I'm going to string the thread in front of where the neck is, and hopefully the tension stays taut enough. I begin with my usual needle to secure the thread to the shoulder area and to attach the first arm. At first I tried to bring the thread through the body with my long needle, but as I suspected, it is way too thick to go through this fabric and arm size. It's just going to leave a huge hole and damage the fabric. So I switched to my other finer needle, and despite it being too short, I just about managed to get it all the way through to the other side. Also, teeth really come in handy while sewing. I promise I'm not a doll vampire, even if it looks like it. I attach the second arm and mostly do it completely out of frame and out of focus because I wasn't paying enough attention because this was very fiddly and annoying, so I'm sorry you couldn't see, but I basically brought the thread back through the other side and tie off the thread so that it stays nice and secure. And here she is, a full head, body, arms and legs. Next, I am going to be making her hair and plan what sort of outfit I want to make her, what kind of character she is, and what her accessories might be. Probably that will be a whole video. If you want to watch the process of me sculpting and painting the face and making the soft body, those are both up on my channel, and I have a playlist called Art Dolls with all my doll making experiments, so those will be very easy to find, and I'll also link them below. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you enjoy these kinds of cozy process videos. I also create drawing and illustration videos as well as art vlogs, so join me if you want to see all of those. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.